Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joshua Idehen, and welcome to Feel Better. This week we have Zahra, a Roundhouse Poetry Collective alumni and a Barbican young poet. This is a weekly poetry broadcast to discuss how best to use failure as a catalyst to move forward. And we love connecting with us old new friends. All of us, we're all fam right now. We love bringing you all together, which is why we brought these good poets to entertain you for 15 minutes, followed by a Twitter conversation for 45 using the hashtag FeelBetterPINC. That's hashtag FeelBetterPINC. So feel free to click like and subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be updated about forthcoming episodes. Sit back, wash your hands thoroughly, sanitize those fingers, and pick up your favorite kitchen utensil and dig into some 15 minutes of good poetry.
Good evening. My name is Zahra, and today I'll be keeping you company over dinner. I'm going to read you 3 poems of mine and then talk about how I think language fails us when we need it the most, and finish off with one last poem. This first one's called Brown Girl's Anthem. It's a golden shovel poem written after one line from the movie, Call Me By Your Name. We die so many deaths before we turn 20. We, the schoolyard Kardashians, we sew our stories into our mouths and rip them out as the school bus pulls up at our door. We outcast our wild tongues so the aunties won't. Scrape it so they won't know where to look for nipped buds. So much is lost in undoing shame. Before we learned of glory, we talked of our love lives to walls. History didn't erase us. We managed ourselves. London Aquatic Centre, Stratford. The first time you wear a bikini in public, its ladies are at the local pool. Your mother's disapproving brows follow you, and the changing room is filled with ghosts of middle school girls' staccato laughter. Your skin winces with no place to hide, twists and turns in front of the mirror, wishing you could be reduced to a sliver of light. You picture knives caressing your hips. Carry your feet to a stream of rapid Bengali and the symphony of school kids' afternoon laughter. You breathe it all in and jump. In the water, you could be rainbow fish or electric eel. Things I wish I could trade my headscarf for. A fishbowl, a space helmet, a tinfoil hat, bubble wrap, a shoebox, a handful of snakes, and it will still be the least suspicious thing in a train carriage. This country sings of all the ways it loves us. In the soft slip of hate mail through the front door, how eyes under furrowed brows walk me down the aisle in tube carriages. How men flip us off as my dad drives me to the train station. How a face peers out, window rolled down to yell Muslim. And I think, yes, I am. The scarf speaks parcel tongue now. Eggs strangers on as if to say, here is an empty goalpost. Kick those slurs in. This is no way to live. Our lives unfolding between every have you reached and be there in 20 texts. I didn't sign up for this when at 12 my mum brought me pretty scarves to grow into someday. I remember writing this last poem long after everyone had gone to bed, alone in my room to the light of my laptop. And it came from a place of fear that I had been building up over a year and a half, over incidents that I couldn't speak to anyone about, and didn't have the words for. I still don't know if I do, but that story is suspended in this version of the poem. And I've been thinking a lot these days about the scramble to rush to write about our experiences as we live through these times, even before we fully understand or unravel our fears, our discomforts, and the experiences we're going through. And I know that this poem, what I tried to do with these 3 poems and with these stories that happened years ago and I've sat through and I've taken ages to write, is to find a way to talk about it without necessarily dragging my readers there to the dark place of shame or fear or guilt. And I don't know how successful these poems are in doing that, but what I do know is that these poems haven't healed me and they don't hold my hand and carry me to a place of safety. And I think that's when language fails us, when we expect the poem to do the work for you, when you expect the words that you write and the words you've propped up on the page to do the work for you, and to do that with an approximation of the experience. That's what writing about your own lived experiences will ever be. In his book, The Hatred of Poetry, Ben Lerner talks about how the desire to write poetry arises from this need to reach towards the transcendent, the divine. And the minute you move from the impulse to the actual writing of the poem, you're already compromised by the finitude of your words. And he talks about poems as a record of your failure, which is intriguing to me, but also so freeing as a poet, that the stories I write don't have to fully capture the fluffs around the edges and every last detail in the things I do want to talk about. They don't have to be big magical carriages that will carry me to a better place. And I think you can't expect that from a poem. At the end of the day, it is just that. It is just a poem. I think when you go to writing workshops and when you ask people why they write or what keeps them writing, and they use words like catharsis or healing and therapy, and I think writing or talking about your experiences can certainly be some of those things, but not therapy. I think it can be powerful and cathartic to write about your own experiences. I think it can be powerful to reclaim the narrative, to own what you have to say, and to get that back. But I certainly think that what you write cannot be substituted for therapy. It can't afford you the self-care you need to process those things. And for me, the 3 poems that I read out, I think writing for me was a way to figure out how I was feeling about those things, or where I was at with how I was feeling. And it's taken me conversations with people and plenty of emotional upheaval and talking and crying and whatever it takes to process those things before they've ended up in these forms, and plenty of edits. And I've sat in rooms too many times at poetry nights or poetry slam competitions where you watch someone share a story they aren't ready to tell yet, and they don't know that. And you see someone at the edge of a breakdown while they're sharing it. I have been at that position where I've shared a story that I wasn't ready to tell. And sometimes I think it comes from a place where you feel the need to share your most traumatic or private experiences, because you are bombarded with this message that you have to have tragedies happen to you as sort of a one-way ticket to greatness or to get that shock factor. And sometimes you don't even know what drives you to tell these stories. In Caleb Clacy's essay Notes on Craft, he talks about how Hannah Gadsby talks about this man in her stand-up special, Nanette. He goes to her to give her feedback after one of her shows, and he says, in order to be a true artist, you need to give up your medication. True artists suffer. And to make his point, he says, would we have sunflowers if Van Gogh were taking antidepressants? And she unpicks his argument. She says, Van Gogh was indeed on medication. She also returns to it in her final line. She says, do you know why we have the sunflowers? It wasn't because Vincent van Gogh suffered. It was because Vincent van Gogh had a brother who loved him, who was his tether to the world, who was his connection. And I think that's the part of the story we need to focus on, connection. And what Hannah Gadsby says in that resonates with me so much, even now, as people scramble to write or record or archive the things we're going through before fully surviving them. I think it drives a dangerous need to kind of put your work out there before considering why or who you're writing for, or asking yourself questions. And I think some things that would be useful to think about before you do is why you're writing this, who you're writing it for, or why you need to share it. And I think a useful framework when it comes to sharing your work is this analogy or scenario put forward by Malika Booker. She says, think of yourself as a scientist in a lab. You can do all the experiments you want, right? All the stories you need to, but you don't have to share each and every one of them with the world. You pick the results you want to talk about. And I think that's been useful for me to think about when thinking about what I do want to share, what I do want to put out, and at what cost these stories are being put out. I think stories need to be told. I think stories about the easy things, the difficult things, the good, the bad, and the ugly, they all are a way to expand our sense of empathy, our sense of connection to each other, and expand and question our discomfort. But I think there are interesting ways to tell them without compromising your sense of safety or the others in the room. The writers I think of when I think of saying stories in an oblique way or approaching them in a slant way, like Emily Dickinson says, tell the truth but tell it slant. I think of Caroline Bird or Wayne Holloway Smith or Jenny Offill's work, how when you read their poems or you read their work, you can feel the anxiety thrumming. You can feel the tension in the room. You can hold the emotional center of the story without being dragged into that place, without knowing the details or the faces of the people in those stories or where the stories necessarily came from. Your poems don't have to be confessions. They don't have to be FIR reports. They don't have to be factually accurate. I think the stories you do have only give you the Lego blocks to play with. And it's your challenge as an artist, once you have sat with them, once you've taken your time with them, to kind of play around and think of the multiverses your story can exist in, your poems can exist in. And that's where I think it gets exciting. When you think of how poems heal you or save you, I think I'm not necessarily thinking of how reading a poem immediately puts me in a better place. I'm thinking of the artists I'm in conversation with and their dedication to craft and how that excites me, and the people it brings me close with just talking about these. So these are things I'm thinking about, and I'm going to read you one last poem that brings me joy before I sign off. Thank you for listening, and I hope you're safe wherever you are and checking in with people that you love. This last poem is called Sargam, and it's named after one of the biggest expat community events where I was growing up. It's also one letter away from meaning heaven in Malayalam. I mishear my friend say she went to heaven for the weekend. How there were string lights everywhere. How they danced all night. How her parents lost their frowns in a crowd. I ask her why she left. I was 6. God knows I don't still picture Jannah the way I did. There's never been a version of heaven that didn't hold my own life. Of date palms and Cornish picnics, the Lebanese diner at the corner, where the sun squeezed our headaches alive, of our days punctuated by the azan. I've downsized my duas since. They exchange outfits at the gates of heaven, asked to be let in, asked about a dead grandfather. Of all the heavens I've hoarded, I like the one with the boxes of frying chicken, the one where the bouncer speaks Arabic, the one where I don't need the right passport to stay.
And that was that. Now head over to Twitter to carry on the conversation using the hashtag FeelBetterPinc. Drop us a line about how failure has helped your lives in positive and negatives and general ways. Head over to our Patreon if you like what we're doing. Become a subscriber and support us. Support poetry in the city. And don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be informed about forthcoming episodes.